It's Monday, April 28th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. We're approaching Battle of the Atlantic Sunday, a day when we remember sacrifices of the sailors, merchant sailors, aviators who perished at sea from 1939 to 1945. Today on the show, we will talk about that time, those sacrifices, and lessons for today. Before we kick into gear here for the show, a couple notes. Who will be Canada's next Prime Minister? Join CBC News live today for election night results from coast to coast to coast. You can watch Canada Votes 2025 with Rosemary Barton, Adrian Arsenault, and the CBC News team, 8 p.m. Newfoundland time, half an hour earlier in most of Labrador. Or you can listen to CBC Radio, the special hosted by Susan Bonner and Pia Chattopadhyay, 8:30 p.m. Newfoundland time, half an hour earlier in most of Labrador. And as always, folks, there's the CBC News app and cbc.ca anytime for up-to-the-minute coverage. For today's topic, the Battle of the Atlantic, I found a scene setter. So it's Legion Magazine and Canada's Ultimate Story. They put together a video a few years back called Military Moments, Battle of the Atlantic. It's narrated by a voice you all know, Alan Doyle. Here's part of it.
The Battle of the Atlantic lasted 68 months, the longest continuous battle of the Second World War. On September 3, 1939, just hours after Britain declared war, a German submarine off the coast of Ireland torpedoed a passenger ship headed to Montreal. The battle for control of the seas had begun. The convoys carrying supplies and troops to Britain were slow and had limited tracking technology. Planes could only escort them so far before they had to return to refuel. So the ships were easy prey for the German submarines, which hunted in groups known as wolf packs. In 1941, German submarines were sinking ships faster than they were being built, and for every U-boat sunk, the Germans built 8 more. By autumn 1942, 2,000 merchant ships had been lost, along with thousands of men and millions of tons of much-needed cargo. The mid-Atlantic became known as the Black Pit. With their success in the middle of the ocean, the Germans got bolder. In May 1942, German U-boats entered the Gulf of St. Lawrence, where they sank 21 ships. If the Germans could cut off the supply chain to Britain, they could win the war. But in 1943, the tide turned. The British developed long-range planes that could escort the convoys. Tracking technology got better, and anti-submarine ships began hunting the wolf packs. The Germans sank fewer ships and faced mounting losses. On April 16, 1945, HMCS Esquimalt was torpedoed by U-190 and went down off Halifax. 44 men died. Three weeks later, that U-boat surrendered to the Canadians. The war was over.
So that's some tape. Legion Magazine and Canada's Ultimate Story from a couple years ago. Military Moments, Battle of the Atlantic, narrated. Well, you can hear Alan Doyle's voice there, right? I don't even need to say it. That's the scene setter for today, folks. Do you have a family connection to the Battle of the Atlantic? Do you have thoughts at this 80th anniversary, this year, 80 years since the end of the Second World War? If you just want to join today's conversation, 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255, emails thesignal@cbc.ca. Joining me in studio Lieutenant Commander retired Margaret Morris, who's also the treasurer of the Crow's Nest. Chris Power, an award-winning photographer and professional scuba diver. And we also have John Olivero, a professional diver with Ocean Quest Adventures. And what's that title again?
The Chief Happiness Officer.
There you go. All right, welcome. Welcome aboard. Glad to have all three of you here. Margie, we'll start with you. We've done shows before, and we've talked about this before, but for the Battle of the Atlantic, what does it mean to you as a retired naval officer, also with the history of the Crow's Nest and everything else?
Yeah. Well, it was a defining chapter in the development of the Royal Canadian Navy. The Navy's been on the go since 1910. It was there for World War I. I can't tell you a single story from World War I with the RCN. It was a trench warfare there. And after World War I, there was a debate whether Canada needs a Navy at all, or maybe we'll just contribute to England, call upon the Royal Navy when we need it. But during World War II, Canada's Navy grew phenomenally from 3,500 personnel to 100,000 by the end of the war, from 13 or 14 ships to almost 400 by the end of the war. And after World War II and the Battle of the Atlantic, there was no more debate about whether or not Canada needs a Navy. Canada does need a Navy.
And how often, when you're in at the Crow's Nest, what are your thoughts all these years later?
I've been a member of the Crow's Nest for 35 years, and I'm still not tired, and I'm still not learning.
It's one of my favorite places on the planet, by the way.
Yeah, I continue to learn. New stories come up, new artifacts are received. And, especially in the quiet times, you just think of, we have albums, photographs from the war years, and that place, as Dave Padden once said, that place must have been the absolute tonic between convoys. After a rough crossing, a warm fire, a hot meal, time with friends, and people who worked in the same environment as you. It wasn't just people everyone spoke the same language. They had the same challenges, the same threats, the same, it was a tough life. And, I'm proud to be a part of it and proud to help preserve it.
And before I go to the guys here, give us just a description for folks who may not know, right? What exactly was and now is the Crow's Nest?
Well, the Crow's Nest started, the location is what was the loft of an old warehouse on Water Street, St. John's. We have the upper half of the building, so we don't have street-level entrance. And although our civic address is Water Street, there's no entrance and nothing to indicate where it is. So we're kind of difficult to find. And when, especially non-members, first visit, I say, okay, you passed the first test. You found us. And an old loft of a warehouse converted. It's not a posh club, but it's very historic and it's authentic. And the artwork that's on the walls is the original. It's not duplicates, not replicas. It's the original artwork by from the ships, by the sailors themselves, with one or two exceptions. Each ship designed and painted its own art that's on the wall there.
Yeah, I look at it. It's like a living museum, right? Like nowadays, and you can go in and just appreciate 80 plus years ago, including post-war. I mean, they and you could only do it, I think, in those times to get a periscope from a U-boat into a bar, right? Like what?
Yeah, well, that got installed through the roof. It was a crane truck that dropped it down through the roof, and it has left the club for maintenance. And we have to stop traffic on Water Street and get a crane truck, and it goes out through the roof. And that's why it doesn't work properly, because just getting it in and out of the club is, and that's before the first wrench goes to do any real maintenance on it. So it's a challenge.
Yeah. All right, Chris, John, I'll turn to you guys, right? Divers. Well, Chris, let's talk about your book for a second. Tell us the title.
Title of my book is World War II Shipwrecks of Newfoundland in Pictures. Our book launch was actually at the Crow's Nest last year.
Right.
Tie it all together. It's a combination of photography of the 4 Belle Island shipwrecks and the 2 shipwrecks off of St. Lawrence and Lawn Point, the Truxton Pollocks. So the book just takes you on a dive, what it's like to dive on these war graves and war memorials. And because not everybody has the chance to go and see what me and Johnny get to see whenever we have the opportunity. And the second story about the Truxton Pollocks is when we went on an expedition to locate and find where the ships went down. We had a rough idea, but it's interesting to go jump off the edge of your boat and not sure what you're going to find.
Yeah, right. Like with the intention of, because you're diving in a war. These are war graves, right?
Yeah, 100%. Well, first of all, Adam, thanks for having us on today.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, and me and Chris actually still have a little rivalry to say who discovered the pollux first. He thinks it was him. I think it was me.
No. It was him. There's aspects of the wreck that I spotted first, but he spotted the main wreck.
I love it. But hey, you know what? Aspects of the wreck you spotted first, and then
right.
the full meal.
I got the photos.
Yeah, and you got the photos.
But of course, we only rediscovered that with the help of a lot of other people, and people have been diving on the Truxtun pollux for years and years. And I think what brings people back to it is the history. It's the same as with the crow's nest. It's something that you can actually see, not really touch, but take pictures and, like Chris's book, and leave only bubbles is what we say. But it's makes it real, puts it, it's tangible. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
These you go to war memorials like in Europe for World War II, and it's these big cenotaphs and whatnot. The difference with these is the only thing that's touched them is time, right? When we're diving, we're hovering over history, and they're true war graves, and nothing's changed on them except the just the rust and the deterioration of time over the 80 years. So it's interesting, especially diving on the wrecks. Over the years, you get to see how they age and the changes. And the stories they reveal, because there's new artifacts come up every year with the changes in the hull, and the wheelhouses have collapsed in some cases, or with the Saginaga, the rear end fell off.
Yeah,
right. So you can see over time, right, as it starts to disappear into the bottom there. When you first set out, right, either your first times going down to one of these ships, or if it's bringing someone and it's their first time, what's that moment like for folks when they try to kind of, I guess, grapple with or take in everything that's there and what it meant at the time that it went down?
Well, the first thing that most people say when they come to Ocean Quest and go in the water into the Belle Island shipwrecks is, it's not as cold as I thought it was going to be. So once they get past that, and then they can really take in the shipwreck, and they're amazed by how big they are. I mean, these ships the Belle Island shipwrecks are, at least 400 feet long, at least 60 feet wide, sitting upright because of the iron ore and the way they went down. And they're just amazed by, that there's still artifacts sitting on the decks. When you go down on them, you can see people's boots, you can see the bullets, you can see, I personally found phonographic records from the captain's quarters, a gas mask, which I think is cool because that was invented here in Newfoundland, not the same one, but it's similar, and things like that. So it's they're just blown away. Yeah, the Belle Island shipwrecks are 4 of the best shipwrecks in the world to dive on. And I'll arm wrestle anyone who says otherwise.
And they had to remove explosives from these too over the years, right? Because I think the Navy was in and did some work around.
There was live ammunition.
Yeah, live ammunition.
Yeah,
because obviously, right, wartime, you go down, and
exactly,
it's going to be there. So this is beneath the surface, right? Now, Margie, when it comes to remembrance around this, what typically happens, whether it's with the Navy or what the Crow's Nest does? Because typically, I think a lot of years, there's a ship that comes in and commits a wreath to sea type of a thing. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a bit about that importance?
Yeah, Battle of Atlantic Weekend. It's one of the most sacred dates in the naval calendar. Victory in Europe was declared on May 8th. So here in Canada, we usually take the first Sunday of May and call it Battle of the Atlantic Sunday. And often, yes, there is a ship in. Unfortunately, not this time. But there'll be a parade, a wreath laying on the War Memorial, and the parade will move off. The Lieutenant Governor will take the salute on a dais at the courthouse there. And we'll have a small reception at the Crow's Nest afterwards. So, very special day. We'll also have a mess dinner centered around Battle of the Atlantic and marking the end of the war at sea.
And for the years when there is a ship, right? Why is that? Because they'll go out through the Narrows and they'll pick a spot. Like, what? I mean, I get why, but I'm just curious for your explanation around why that they do that.
Well, it's important to remember those incredible sacrifices. And again, the Canadian Navy grew so rapidly from 3,500 to 100,000. That was essentially doubling in size every year. Imagine a small college going from 3,500 to 7,000, 14, 28, and so on. Building classrooms, hiring teachers, and enrolling students, and teaching. The Canadian Navy was enlisting sailors, building ships, training crews, and fighting a war all at once. And so were mistakes made? Absolutely. But they did get the job in the end. But one story I love is a Canadian corvette's taking a convoy across the Atlantic, and they're zigzagging, evasive steering to avoid submarines. And a junior ship makes a sloppy maneuver. They zigged when they should have zagged, or they zagged a little too far, or something like this. Senior ship's not happy, wants to express his displeasure, can't get on the radio to do it. Radio direction finding equipment is on the go, and this could give away your position. You don't want to do that. So he gets on the flashing light, or gets a signalman on the flashing light, sends a message. Senior ship to the junior ship, dits and daws, one letter at a time. What are you doing? Junior ship dits and daws back, one letter at a time. Mostly learning. What a perfect answer. Like, how can you be mad at someone when they're mostly learning?
Well, and it speaks to, like you said, like the ramp up, right? So when you think of that small number, and as they ramp up with, like, just from the training to getting heads in beds and logistics around it, right? All of that, plus the minute you leave the harbor in a convoy, that's the war, right? It's right out there, which is kind of, it's growing up as I slowly learned about this, it still blows my mind today to think that the staging ground for St. John's Harbor and folks leaving, because there's so many memorials at the Crow's Nest, like was it the Spike one that always comes to mind, right?
Yes. Yeah, the Spike was put there opening night. They had a contest who could drive a Spike into the deck with the fewest number of blows. And it was the captain of the corvette Spikenard. And that was January 27th, 1942. Spikenard sailed on January 31st. And on the night of February 10th, 11th, off Iceland, they were torpedoed with a heavy loss of life. The captain and all the officers were lost, and a good many of the crew. There were only 8 survivors out of a crew of 59. They weren't the first Canadian ship torpedoed in World War II, not the first Canadian sailors lost, but they were the first club members lost in the Battle of the Atlantic. And so that holds a special place there.
Yeah, and in the Crow's Nest, you've got is it brass, right? In the
Yes, where the Spike got driven in, that piece of floor was eventually cut out, and it's up on a post with the nail there and a brass ring around it, Spikenard, his Spike.
Yeah, so like when we start the show, we're talking about the Crow's Nest and all the history and all these stories that you can just start to kind of think about. Every inch of the place has got a story of remembrance and such a fascinating bit behind it. And
it's only a little bit of tangible evidence, but people get emotional, when they come in and they see their father's, a badge from their father's ship or some, item from their father's wartime service. There was one fellow who, his father was in the Crow's Nest when victory in Europe was declared. So he got emotional. There was nothing representing his father's ship, but just the fact that he could fix his father in a place and time.
Yeah.
And I've brought people to tears on the tours, not intentionally, but it makes it worthwhile because obviously it means a lot to people. You realize, and if you didn't have these little mementos, we wouldn't be telling the story. Spikenard would be long forgotten.
But this is for everything. So often for this show, a lot for me, it's about time and place, and then thinking what it means for today, right? Whether we're diving on wrecks, right? Time and place. What was it like the day before that thing went down, or the weeks before, and then the day of, and then now afterwards? What are we learning from it when we hear a story about a Spike and a ship, or we hear someone's father was there for VE Day, and you think right here on this spot, like all the ghosts that inhabit around.
With the Belle Island shipwrecks where they were torpedoed, right? It's just interesting to think about that day. It was flat calm, like nothing was going on, and then all of a sudden, chaos. All right, the torpedoes came out of nowhere because nobody knew the U-boats were in the bay, right?
No.
So like the locals, like I can imagine you could hear the echoes of the explosions up and down the bay.
Oh, just because I
And it
never
comes
thought
out
about
of
that
nowhere.
before. Because having sailed in Conception Bay, or I grew up
Yeah.
in CBS, and then thinking about how calm that place can be. I haven't been to Belle Island many times, but then yes, this and that type of how loud that would be.
Well, the stories are exactly that. The when the torpedo, hit Scotia Pier, and it was the practice was that they would try to sink ships at the wharf or disrupt the wharf, and then that would create a longer time for the convoy to get back underway. And the torpedo hit the wharf, created this gigantic boom throughout and echoed through all the mines, and the people were all shaken out of bed, got up thinking that they were under attack by the Germans, got dressed up in their Sunday best, and were waiting around in their houses to be soldiers to come knocking on their doors.
Wow.
Yeah. It was ever present, right? Here in Newfoundland, my mom would tell stories. She was born in 1938. So she remembered, putting the dark over the windows and, stories of spies and on the, on the beaches of Topsail Beach and all kinds of, it was all around their life. It wasn't just off in Europe or wherever or out in the ocean.
Yeah, I think the Scotia Pier was the only time they attacked North America directly. So, that was back when Newfoundland wasn't a province. But if you think about it, that was now Canada. So, Canada was attacked directly by the Germans.
Canada was, yeah. I was corrected by a young kid on a tour one day, and he told me that there was another small island off the coast of Alaska that the Japanese had attacked.
Yeah.
Similar kind of scenario. I don't know all the details, but yeah, it's
You're like, thanks, kid.
Yeah, exactly. Well, now I know, right? So, and I can tell it here today. So.
Yeah.
Why is it important to keep this stuff with us, these stories, this remembrance that because obviously the lives lost, right? Part of it, sacrifice from all these communities. Why do you think it's so important to talk like this and remember this type of stuff?
A lot of the lessons learned are universal.
Yeah.
The resilience of people in tough times. There's a story about Skeena. They had a really tough convoy, 65 ships. I think 14 were sunk and 4 more were damaged. And imagine being on the bridge of a ship and boom, one ship goes in your convoy, boom, another one's gone. And just to keep on going. And it's just amazing that the resilience and resolve to just get the job done.
Yeah, having done maneuvers on ships and then but then putting a lens of the Battle of the Atlantic over that, and just thinking of that type of a thing. It's it's a lot.
Yeah.
Right, and the people just kept going. What do you guys?
I mean, I think today is a very important day to talk about this because it's election day, right? These people were fighting for our freedoms. There may be a very different story if the people hadn't developed the technology to fight the U-boats. We may be, speaking different language here today. So it's all the rights and the freedoms that we kind of take for granted. These people paid the ultimate sacrifice for, and that doesn't go unnoticed when you are in our case, diving, and it's great for the museums and the crow's nests and the books, and to keep that alive so that people who may not be as intrepid to go down and go scuba diving, but can still get a sense of it in a place that has, or a book that has the ghosts, the soul of it.
Diving the Belle Island wrecks versus diving other wrecks I have been purposely sunk. It's different. It's more solemn when you're down there because it has that history, right? There are times where it almost feels like you can sense the ghosts.
Yeah.
But Newfoundland has murky water, so it's interesting to go down the mooring line, and these ships kind of appear out of the fog like a ghost ship in the legends and stories.
Yeah.
Do you ever get used to that? Or is it each time? Oh, there it is?
I wouldn't say you get used to it, but you appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to dive on Gander Lake on one of the bombers, and Johnny's been on that one, and that's the most eerie dive I've ever done because you can't see more than 3 feet ahead of you.
And it's such a deep lake, right?
Yeah, well, the plane's at about 130, 135 feet.
It's on a slant, so some of it is and some of it isn't.
Yeah, so that was a different experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's each situation is different and different dates. Like if we are going for we do every year at Ocean Crest, we do a Remembrance Day dive. We try to make sure we do, and we bring a wreath down and with divers and that kind of stuff. Or if are bringing people who have direct descendants from the ship or something like that. But it also, there's the time that made the biggest significance on me was in 2016. We did an expedition where we dove inside the Bell Island mines as well. And the day before, I dove on the Rose Castle, and I saw this bottle, and it kind of stuck out of my mind. And it was a bottle that back then they would use these look like whiskey bottles, for lack of a better word, and they would use it for their tea. And I went over to Bell Island, and I saw that they have this little mock lunchroom, and I saw the same exact shaped bottle, and I was like, yeah, these people down here are the same, come from the same cloth that are the people up here in the mine, and it's real people.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's all real people. They may not be around anymore, but they were made special by their circumstances.
Yeah, and when we think of the communities then and the ones that followed and us here now, right, it's the continuation of these people, right? These
100%.
actual people and these folks that we lost,
Yep.
and then remembering them. You're listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh. Today, we're coming up on Battle of the Atlantic Sunday, and it's 2025, right? This is the year, 80 years since the end of the Second World War. If you've got thoughts or a connection to the Battle of the Atlantic, perhaps a family member fought in the Battle of the Atlantic, or if you have questions for my guests, or you just want to phone in and have a chat about the significance of the Battle of the Atlantic and 80 years since the end of this 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War this year, call us 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. You can text or you can email us thesignal@cbc.ca. We've got Dave Padden on the line. Hi, how you doing?
Hey, Adam. Good. Thanks, and hello to all your guests. Hi, Margaret.
Hello, Dave.
Thanks for coming on the show. We've been emailing back and forth. First question, tell me about your father.
Okay. Dad was pretty active during the war, and I read in some of his papers there that he had more sea time than any other ship's doctor in the Canadian Navy. Briefly, he was finishing med school in 1941 in New York, and he finished up, and he signed up right away for the Royal Canadian Naval Volunteer Reserve, went to Esquimalt, did his basic training, joined the mine-sweeping flotilla, which went to Halifax through the Panama Canal, was transferred to a corvette, HMCS Kitchener, and spent 10 months on the what they call the Newfoundland run, back and forth across the Atlantic, exporting convoys. Spent some time at the Crow's Nest when he was on this side. 10 months of that. He was then transferred back to minesweepers for the invasion of Europe. For D-Day, he was on HMCS Guysborough, a minesweeper, keeping Channel 2 clear at Omaha Beach so that our allies, the Americans, could mount a successful landing there. So I've been thinking about that the last 2-3 months. What happened then? Guysborough was subsequently torpedoed in 1945 with the loss of half the crew. And Dad was lucky. He, by then, had been transferred to HMCS Team, a frigate. But 12 days after Guysborough was torpedoed, Team took a torpedo in the stern. 4 men were lost, and 60 feet of the ship was just about surgically removed and sank. And that was the end of the war for Dad. So that was his wartime career.
Yeah. When we were emailing back and forth, you also mentioned your uncle served too, right?
Yes, Dad's brother, my Uncle Dick, he was on as my mother called it, a glorified speedboat. It was a 70-foot motor torpedo boat. They were called dog boats, and it was 70 feet long, or 70 and a half feet long. It had 3 Spitfire engines. I remember all this stuff. They could do about 40 knots, and he was out in the English Channel in the middle of the night a lot of the times in dogfights, basically, with German convoys, the E-boats and the merchant vessels they were escorting. And one night they were out there, and he told me in his own words, he said, one minute everything was fine, the next thing it was raining. We were in the water, it was raining matchsticks because they'd hit a mine designed to sink, a steel ship, and this little boat was made out of plywood. And they all survived, and they were picked up by the crew of another MTV and taken back to England. So that was his story. Pretty hair-raising stuff, I think.
You sent me a couple of pictures, right? One of your dad, one of your uncle, plus of one of, I think the Kitchener with the Corvette. One of the things that always stands out to me, because I remember growing up as a kid, right? You think about war veterans and you think of age and everything else. But then whenever you look at these pictures of people during that time, and it's largely of young faces, right? And this with your uncle and also your dad. I mean, granted, he's got a beard in it, but still, these are not these are young people, and you imagine what they had to go and do at the time. It's But Dad was actually I think 28, so he was comparatively old compared to a lot of them. Old guy. Yeah. Right. But most of them were much younger. Yeah, for sure. So every year around Battle of the Atlantic Sunday, I mean, obviously, you think of your father, your uncle, you think about some of these stories that you've just recounted. What else do you think about when it comes to the Battle of the Atlantic and its importance or significance all these years later?
Well, I'll maybe veer off on a slight tangent. I'm just getting ready to go over and vote. And one thing I'm thinking about is defense spending these days. So I'm wondering which party is likely to make the best of that commitment, because I read A Bloody War, I think it was by Hal Lawrence, and one thing that really stuck with me, and I don't want to cast a downer here, but was how unprepared we were when World War II broke out, and the extra cost in terms of, as they used to say, blood and treasure. Nobody wants to think about it ever happening again, but if it does, I sure hope we're better prepared than we were in 1939. So you didn't ask that, I guess, but I
no, hey, tangents are fine, right? Because they one of the other bits that I think comes up on this show a lot is how much everything is connected, right? And we already talked earlier in the show. We were talking about voting, and today is election day and what it can mean, and then this is another thing to think about, right? It's all there. So no, I appreciate the tangent actually.
Yeah, well, that, and I specifically mentioned the idea that, or the fact that Dad was in a minesweeper clearing the channel for American troops to land on D-Day, and how much things have changed now, which we're all aware of. But anyway, I always think about Dad and Uncle Dick, and also my mother, who she wasn't in the Battle of the Atlantic, but she was a nurse during the war in London. I think about them all, quite often.
Yeah, and just everything that generation went through and what it meant and what it means for the rest of us.
For sure, yeah. It's something that should concentrate the mind around about this time of the year, I think.
Dave, thanks for coming back on the show, and I appreciate the chat, as always.
Oh, you're always welcome, Adam. Thanks.
All right, cheers. Dave Patton there. We've got another call we're going to get to. I will say, so Dave mentioned defense spending, and I will use this opportunity to plug a show last week that we had on Wednesday with Vice Admiral retired Mark Norman. If you want to know about defense spending, Arctic sovereignty, the importance, what that 2% bit means for NATO, the importance of NATO, all of that, we got into it last week on the show. So I do, if you missed it, it's on the CBC Listen app, and we also posted it on YouTube on the CBC Newfoundland and Labrador's YouTube page under the Signals playlist. So it is all there. Let's go to Rob, who's on the line. Hello.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Good. Thoughts or around the Battle of the Atlantic or the anniversary? Go ahead.
I got a bit of a story. I had an uncle that served on HMCS Preserver, which was a depot ship that serviced kind of like a smaller fleet of wooden ships that was used for coastal patrol, and they were used here in Newfoundland. I think they responded shortly after they were stationed here after the attacks on Belle Isle. Yeah, and they actually spent 2 summers up in Red Bay, where this ship and the fleet of smaller ships would try and close the Strait of Belle Isle up to the U-boats. Yeah. But one of the interesting things was they were scheduled to go back up there in 1945, about this time of year, but they couldn't get there because of the ice. And then, of course, Germany surrendered. And there was a U-boat that showed up to surrender in, I think it was Witless Bay.
Right on.
Yeah. And so they were dispatched to take the crew off the U-boat. So my uncle told me a story that as they were approaching the U-boat, of course, the crew of the Preserver was all curious about the crew of their U-boat. And as they came closer, one of their crew members jumped on board the U-boat. At first, they thought he was in a fight, but then they realized he was hugging the guy. Turned out the guy was his first cousin.
Wow.
So there was just a bit of a happy story, I guess. They both survived the war, but it was a neat experience that he had. Yeah. So I just thought I'd share that. That might be neat to hear.
So what was his cousin doing on the U-boat?
Well, I guess what happened was, between World War I and World War II, one of the guy that was serving the Canadian Navy had immigrated to Canada. And a family just ended up on both sides of the war. And by chance, they reunited during this surrender, I guess. Yeah.
Wild. Yeah. I always like those types of stories because, you say the world's small, you never know who you're going to run into, but you don't necessarily think your long-lost German cousin's going to be on the U-boat that you're going to take the surrender of.
And I think it's always important to remember there's always 2 sides, and sometimes we forget about that, and these are real people in the war, and they're affected at that. Yeah.
No, I think it's a great point to make. Rob, thanks so much for the call.
You're welcome.
All right, cheers. There you go. All right, you never know, and there's always. Margie, there's so many. How many stories over the years of folks who you've connected with?
I couldn't count them.
No, because there's so many.
So many. But it's always nice to have that personal, real people. So much of history is written from the perspective of presidents and prime ministers and admirals and generals, but it's that guy in the U-boat, that guy in the Corvette, the motor launch, in the trench, whatever. His stories
get the lower
are the
decks
ones
up,
that
right? Yeah, elevated for a change, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sadly, there'll always be conflict in the world.
Yeah.
I majored in economics. The textbook definition of economics is the allocation of scarce resources among unlimited wants and needs. Scarce resources on one hand, unlimited wants and needs. What do you got? A racket. The best we can hope for is a fair fight, ideally a nonviolent fight, but there'll always be conflict, and we always have to be prepared.
Yeah. Right. Guys, any thoughts on what Mr. Padden was saying or what Rob was saying there?
What Rob was saying reminded me of a story that we tell at Ocean Quest. Was speaking of coincidences and that kind of thing. Up around Red Bay, we had many years ago now had taken a group of divers that had come from England, and they were diving all over Newfoundland. They got up to Red Bay, and they're like, "Is there anything worth diving on up here?" And someone of the local guys was like, "Oh, an airplane crashed out in the harbor." So they went out based on what the people had told them. And they had found the airplane. Turns out it was an airplane that was used for dropping mines in the ocean to get submarines. And then this particular day, it had to been reutilized to bring, I believe it was like paychecks or mail or something to that community. and they discovered it there, many, many years later. The irony is that airplane crashed on the same day as the Bell Island attacks. So if it had been out doing its job, we may not have had those shipwrecks. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you never know. You're going to find out.
Exactly.
That's wild. Yeah. Margie, you mentioned, so we were just hearing from Rob there, right? So you heard this reconnection of a family back during the war. But over the years, there have been folks who, from Europe, from Germany, and their allies during that time, come over to connect with the Crow's Nest.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, you got a story for us?
Sure. Well, the most recent one just happened
of the many, yeah.
Of the many, just happened in January, where I got an email from a fellow in Austria, and he's researching his father. I'm not sure when his father died, but obviously this man does not have too much of his father's wartime career. So he's doing some research, discovers the Crow's Nest online, watches our video, and he emails the club. I'm the custodian of the club computer. And so I get this email. Buddy is asking, confirming that we have the periscope. Wants to know if non-members can visit, asked me to recommend a hotel. This led to an exchange of emails. And in one of them, he says, now, is it a problem that my father served in the German Navy? So I said, of course not. And I told him about Werner Hirschman. Werner Hirschman was 22 years old at the end of the war, and he was the chief engineer in the U-190. And he was one of the many who emigrated back to Canada once the war was over. And so I told him about Hirschman, and the fact Hirschman wrote a book and all this business. It turns out this fellow from Austria, his father actually served in the U-190 as, he called it a steerman. I'm not quite sure what role. I don't know if that means helmsman, which would be a lower deck position and rank, or if it's some other term and that his father was possibly an officer. I don't know. But I'm going to find out because he arrives on Friday.
Friday?
Yeah. He's coming over, he and his wife, and we'll be hosting him at dinner at the Crow's Nest. What's
that experience like whenever that happens?
So far, it's always been positive,
yeah.
and I'm quite confident it will be positive this time. But you have to have reconciliation. War is a bad thing. Wars that never end is worse again.
Yeah.
But there are so many great stories of reconciliation, people who fought on opposite sides and, shaking hands. It might perhaps not right away.
Yeah, sometimes it takes a couple of years, yeah.
It takes a while to heal, But, there comes a time you just have to move on, shake hands and move on.
Yeah, and again, you think of that, this guy's father, right, being in that U-boat, and then at the end of the war, and now all these years later, time and place in the Crow's Nest. So the periscope has had a couple times and places, right, over the years.
We had one fellow, he wandered in on a Friday afternoon, Rudy, I forget his last name, but he'd been a torpedo man in the U-190. He emigrated to Canada after the war, lives in Hamilton. But the first time he looked through the periscope was in the club.
Really?
Well, I get when the U-boat was operational, of course, the periscope was strictly officer territory.
I guess, yeah,
it's not a plaything for the crew.
Yeah. So he was like, "Oh, this is what that was like." Yeah. Oh, that's guys. Any other thoughts for you for the theme of time and place, the theme of diving on wrecks, and just running into folks when you're out and you bringing people down in dives. Like, what are the other things that they kind of talk about, or that you've experienced from bringing people to meet history in such an interesting way?
There's always seems to be like a wow factor,
yeah.
Especially with the wrecks we have. Like Johnny had said, when they were torpedoed, they were full iron ore, so they sank vertically and buried their keels right into the. So they're all stood up, all four of them. They're in great shape for because of the cold water and whatnot here. So most times when you're diving on wrecks, they're debris fields, right? So the wrecks we have here, like that, there is a bit of a wow factor. Everybody comes up very impressed, especially on like the deeper wreck, the Rose Castle, the Marconi room on top, the radio room, is still in spectacular shape. You can read the gauges, and the plaques. Right? And that's at 95 feet. So, like when people poke their head into that room, everybody's always impressed.
Yeah. What for your book? What was the catalyst for getting you to do a book on these wrecks? Because it's such the pictures are beautiful.
Thank you.
And striking, right? So what happened?
I'd been taking the photos in this book span 10 years.
Yeah.
And my mother always wanted me to put something together, and over COVID, I lost my job for a bit, and my wife looked at me and said, "You got to go do something." So I locked myself in the room and started editing photos, and then that turned into a mixed book gift for my mother, and that turned into, this came out a lot better than I expected. And over the next couple of years, I realized what kind of story I wanted to put with it. That led to the book.
Well, you're some buy for doing that for your mom. No?
He is some buy.
Pretty good. Johnny, what did you think when you first saw the tactile version?
Oh, it's fantastic, absolutely. And he has great models. First of all,
because you're in it.
Yeah, because I'm in it.
The only person in the book more than Johnny is my wife.
It is fantastic, not only because other people get to see it, but even when we were just flipping through it here before, it was a great reminder for me to see, remember that time that we went, the things that we did, and other things that went on at that time for us personally, But what I was thinking of just before was that when we meet people on our travels throughout the world for trade shows and whatever, the people who have some connection to the shipwrecks or whatever, they're always very grateful that we took the time to make the effort to keep this history alive and pass these messages on and make these books and stories and shows like this.
Ocean Quest has really been they've been really stewards of history and keeping the wrecks in place and protected over the years, because before they were involved, people have gone down and salvaged the props off the back and pillaged some of the wreck for artifacts and whatnot. But now nobody's really doing that. So.
Yeah, and I find sometimes when it comes to putting something together like this book, right? If like sometimes you're one of only a couple people around who can do it. Like if you don't do it, it doesn't get done.
Yeah.
Right. Because if it's not for the couple of the local divers here who've spent time doing this time and time again with the connections locally and the understanding of the history behind it, there's so much that can easily be lost.
Well, it's the same thing, just like the history of the war and all that kind of stuff. If I don't give a shout out to Rick and Debbie Stanley, who are the owners of Ocean Quest, we wouldn't be talking about this book right now. All the people that have dove before us. There was Newfoundland Diving Society. I think I said that name wrong, but there was people who came before us. Who shared their information with us, and we learned from them, and then we do our due diligence and keep on presenting it to people in the future, so that it never gets forgotten.
Margaret, for yourself, how did it, from being in the Naval Reserves and spending all the time you spent in the Navy, but then with the Crow's Nest, how has it obviously you've learned more over the years, and even with each phone call to the Crow's Nest, it's a new type of learning that you're doing, right? For someone whose relative served on the U-boat or wherever else. What's the evolution been like for your appreciation of the Battle of the Atlantic and the history and sacrifice?
Oh, it keeps growing. Again, the tremendous sacrifices, the fact that. Once again, getting back to how quickly the Navy grew, and largely a volunteer effort. Conscription was brought in, but not till quite late in the war, and the worst was over by then. So largely a volunteer effort. Everyone dropped what they were doing, and I think the Canadian contribution to World War II was often underappreciated, undervalued. We had 1 million people in uniform.
That's a lot.
For World War II. Yeah. Our population at the time was only about 13 million. So I think we're punching well above our weight there. And if you weren't wearing a uniform, you were probably supporting the war effort in some way, building jeeps and ships and aircraft and so on. And so I think it's just a remarkable moment in our history, and one that's under recognized. But keeping the club going, books like what the boys have here, keeping the stories alive. It's so important to keep the story alive.
What's the interest like still now with the club, do you find?
We have lots of interest, lots of people inquiring about tours and wanting to visit and spend time there, and lots of inquiries too. Do we have something from my father's ship, my uncle's ship, that sort of thing. And the club is not really well organized. It's rather haphazard. And
I just call you directly when I need stuff because I just.
But some people have said, how come you don't have all the corvettes displayed in one wall and all the frigates on another?
Oh my gosh.
And no, that's much too clinical.
Yeah, that's
Like, nothing in the club. Nothing is straight, level, Plumber's Square. It's in a building that was built hastily after the Great Fire of 1892. So the building is 125 years old. Again, it was a loft, and so a hardly ideal museum situation for display. And that's something we're very conscious of too. That we have to keep good air quality, humidity levels, and all that.
Yeah,
to
of
try and
course.
preserve things as best we can.
My
So
dad
it's
always
quite a
said
job.
that the stairs were quite treacherous, especially on the way out.
Well, we like to say that
I can attest to that too from experience.
we like to say no one has fallen, but a few have slid.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, I think first mess dinner, I was 18, and we were at the Crow's Nest, and Fabian O'Day. Do you remember that one when
I
Fabian
do,
O'Day was
yes,
there? And
yes.
so we had either, I think it was a prime rib or seal flipper. I wasn't brave enough for the seal flipper at the time, and I knew nothing about I knew World War II history. I thought Corvettes were cars at the time. Right? This is where I was for this, and I still remember that dinner because you were there. You
I
were
was
at that
there,
one.
yes.
And just what it imparted on history and the importance. This is as I started to learn about the Battle of the Atlantic and everything behind it. What did he serve on during? Former lieutenant governor, right, and a World War
Yes.
II veteran.
And he served at sea. I can't remember the ships.
I just remember him serving at sea and then talking at that time, right? And then now here we are all these years later, and like a lot of these folks are gone, right? So if it's not about books or if it's not the stories that are there, things can get lost. So this is why books such as this one here, and we talk about these stories at the Crow's Nest, they're so important.
Yeah. There's a great quote from Karen Blixen. She wrote it out of Africa. All life's burdens are made lighter when they're wrapped in a story. And when you realize that, when you're in troubled times, that you're not the only one, you're not the first one. These have all happened before, and technology changes. But again, the stories of resolve and resilience and challenge, tragedy and triumph and cowardice and courage, these recurring themes.
Human
throughout
stories.
history. Human stories.
Human stories. Final thoughts, guys?
I just want to put a thanks out there to all the service members currently serving, and we're currently rebuilding a lot of our fleet. So all the shipbuilders and stuff out there. All my family works at the Halifax shipyard.
Oh, right on. There you go.
So their shipbuilding runs in the family. I've worked there for a few years, but they've been maintaining the fleet and building the next fleet as we go.
Johnny, final thought?
Yeah, I definitely echo what Chris just said. Thanks to everyone. And my final thought is that I was just in Gibraltar a month ago, and that's where my dad's side of the family is originally from, and I got to do the tours of Gibraltar from the World War II and all that kind of stuff. And it's so true. They echo the same stories, So what's important is universal stories that are very important to everybody, not just here, but across the pond as well.
Yeah, everywhere. All right, Johnny Olivero, Chris Power, Margaret Morris, thank you so much for this. I'm going to promo today's show. We got a little tune to leave you with. So coming up tomorrow, folks, we're talking global leadership, right? What kind of world is our next Canadian government stepping out into? What kind of global leadership is needed at the moment? Where do we fit into that? That's tomorrow's show. Until then, thanks for listening.